in urban India, there are about 86 million Gen Zs, which is approximately 16% of the total urban population. The interesting part with Gen Zs is that they have always been with chaos. They are born with the internet, but they have always seen chaos. For them, content never stops. But the way they consume content is very different from the way a millennial would consume a content.
How interested are Gen Z in politics?
On politics, yes, they're very much interested in politics.
Even when you say that Gen Z cares about politics, political news, there's also a layer of what type of political news they care about.
Do you agree that Gen Z has a lesser attention span?
Well, so the answer is yes and no.
For Gen Z, being online isn't a choice, it's second nature. They're the first generation that grew up entirely online. It's how they get their news, their entertainment, even their politics. So what does that mean for news? Today, we'll be unpacking the findings from a collaborative report by Google and Kantar titled Reimagining News for Gen Z. The study shows us how Gen Z discovers news largely through social media and video platforms, while still placing trust in traditional publishers. It highlights the need for more visual, interactive storytelling, for leveraging GenAI, and for using local languages to really connect with this future-facing demographic. And here's the best part. You will be walking away with the new rules of news, the top 10 insights for connecting with Gen Z that will guide you on how to adapt your content and distribution strategies to build a loyal Gen Z audience. This session is powered by Google, and we are grateful for their support. Leading us through this presentation is Biswapriya Bhattacharjee, Director of Kantar South Asia, where he leads the technology and media business. With more than 2 decades of experience in market research and industry insights, Biswa has been at the forefront of understanding how technology, media, and audiences evolve. So let's dive in and find out what the next generation of news consumers expect from us. Please join me in welcoming Biswa with a round of applause.
Hello, everyone. I don't think it's very easy to come in after such a power-packed session. I'll do my best to keep you engaged, and I'm sure you'd find this exciting enough. I'm a Bangalorean. I was not born and brought up here like Vasu was, but I moved here about 22 years back to join this organization. And today morning, when I left for office at about 8:30, it's a 5-kilometer drive from home to office on the dreaded Outer Ring Road. I planned for a 45 to 50-minute drive, which is the normal time. And I got into my car, switched on Google Maps, and it tells me 10 minutes to get to office. And I thought today this room would be half empty, right? Because I did not expect people to come in between a Dussehra and a weekend on a Friday to fill in the room. So I was pleasantly surprised to see all of you here. So thank you so much. Well, so what I would want to do today is walk you through a research that we did along with Google. This research is on understanding Gen Z and what they want. So how many of you would actually be targeting a Gen Z here? Maybe raise your hands. Not many, actually. Okay. How many of you find it challenging to kind of connect with Gen Z? Oh, a lot more. Wonderful. So I think we'll have something interesting for all of you. Right, so if we can move to the next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk to you today is actually how you actually get Gen Z into the newsrooms, get them to understand, get you to understand what they need and actually curate your content which is relevant and in lines with what they would look at. So let's meet the Gen Z. If I move to the next slide, please. The Gen Zs are actually, so this research is something that we did across a huge number of samples, more than 4,500 of them across urban India. And if you look at from the perspective of how large is the Gen Z population in India, you would be amazed that in urban India, there are about 86 million Gen Zs, which is approximately 16% of the total urban population. And of course, they are a lot more than what millennials are when it comes to being online. Now, the challenge and the interesting part with Gen Zs is that they have always been with chaos. They are born with the internet, but they have always seen chaos. One chaos after the other, whether it's in terms of the changes in technologies that we have seen over the last 20, 25 years, or it is the kind of changing the global shifts that we are seeing, whether it's the war, the economic crisis that we had earlier, and also the cultural churn that we are talking about as well. All of these have actually got Gen Zs to find out the best way in which they could adapt and plan their game as such. And what they have been doing is actually three key things. If you'd notice at the bottom, I'm not sure if it's visible to all of you. First is exploring and evolving on their own terms. The second, they're getting control as such, and they're getting control by upskilling, by side hustles, and by staying curious. And finally, they are focusing on self-care, creativity, and living their life as of now, not really thinking about the future. So what that does for the Gen Zs is that it actually makes them very, very compelling audience for a lot of the technology and digital companies. Now, in the context of where Gen Zs are coming from, how many of them are there, and how they look at their life in general and technology in particular, if you were to look at how do they consume content in general and news in particular, and if I move to the next slide, please, what you would actually notice is that for them, content never stops. The consumption of content never stops. Every moment is an opportunity for them to consume content, and they keep consuming it. But the way they consume content is very different from the way a millennial would consume a content, right? News for them is a small portion of content. News does not exist separately in their mind. It's part of what content is for them, and a small portion of them that is actually news. And therefore, discovery is incidental to them. What is more important in this connected, evolving, social media-led world is the fact that the feed, in many cases, is the front page for them. That's where they consume most of the news. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of the findings of the research, what you'd see is that the Gen Zs actually go to sources like the social media and video platforms a lot more than the news aggregator and publisher websites as such. It's not that they don't go there, but they go there a lot less often than what they would to social media. And therefore, and also the way in which they consume news is also very important, because a lot of them actually get news which is shared by others. As a matter of fact, link sharing over WhatsApp and Insta and other sources is about 60% of where they would actually consume a lot of the news. And therefore, the news consumption habits as well is very different in this audience set. Does this strike a kind of resonance with any of you? Does it seem like what you have experienced? Any feedback, any inputs from any one of you very quickly? I know we have time, so we can kind of keep it a little more interactive, I'm sure.
But even when they share links, sometimes when you ask for authenticity, so that the links that are shared are actual proper news publications because they want that to be backed by fact.
Exactly, exactly. And that's a very important point which I'll come to as well, because one of the key things that they look for in all the cases is trust, right? So if I were to move on, therefore, so this is from a perspective of what they look at. And given this, the news in its current form, the regular news, feels staid and boring for them. They feel it's too formal, too one-sided, too preachy in a way. So it's more about them being spoken to. There is no interactivity in the news content that is being spoken about. And therefore, it is not really something that they get energized by. It is something that's energy sapping for them. And they also feel that these are either too frivolous or too outdated in many of the cases in terms of the kind of information that's there. So what they prefer is content that is easy to consume, which is empathetic towards them, and is engaging. So critically, what essentially all the Gen Zs have been saying, that they need to be informed, they want to be informed, but it is not at the cost of peace for them. And that is why, if I move to the next slide, please, the creators actually work a lot better with them, the news creators, because the news creators speak to the Gen Zs and not speak at the Gen Zs. And that's a very specific input that we have got across all the researches that we have done in the Gen Z space, is that the Gen Zs want to be spoken to, they don't want to be spoken at. And what it essentially means is that they're looking at people who can actually keep the content a lot more engaging, a lot more contextual to their life, a lot more honest, share good and the bad, give them a balanced view, make it useful and simple. At the end of the day, they look at information that is, as I said, smart but not preachy. They don't want somebody to be preaching to them. They want it to be in a language that's simple, raw, but effective as such, and speak the way and speak what they would like to hear, not about anything and everything. Let's move to the next slide, please. One of the key things that people have been speaking about is language matters, whether it's Indian language, whether it's vernacular. The languages become very important. What we have seen is that, well, it does play a role, and we are talking about urban India, though, so we'll need to keep that in mind. We are not talking about rural youth here. But in urban India, while language does play a role, it's not that English is not consumed as such. So while there is Indian languages that are used, there is also a lot of content that is consumed in vernacular languages. And if you'd notice, a lot of written text is consumed a lot more in English, while a lot of video and audio is consumed in the local language as such. But I think the most important thing that we realized as we went through this research is the fact that there is a clear distinction in the mind of the Gen Zs in terms of what does English news mean and what does vernacular or local language, Indian language news mean. And when they think of Indian language news, it's a lot more local, a lot more context to their cities, their towns, in many cases, their neighborhoods as well. Well, while when they look at English news, it's a lot more global, a lot more national as such. Right, so in that way, there is a very clear demarcation in the minds of the Gen Zs in terms of what is an English news or an English news app versus what is a local language or an Indian news app as such. So that's about the language preference. If I move to the next slide, please. But at the end of the day, what we are kind of, as traditional medias, what we are tackling today is the core four things. Biased mainstream narrative, and I think we've heard a lot about that in the morning as well. The fact that there is a lot of irrelevant breaking news. So everything, even the smallest of news, can become a breaking news. Over-the-top news, which is essentially you do not do a proper fact check, but come up with news even before you have done a proper fact check to make it sensational. And that's not really something that's appreciated by the Gen Zs. And finally, repeating the news. So it's the same thing that you keep talking about as breaking news from morning till evening, right, as if it's happened about 10 minutes back, which is not the case. So essentially, if you look at it, these are the four key things that the Gen Zs desist, and that's what essentially a lot of the traditional and electronic media in particular talk about today. So if you move to the next slide, please. So what is Gen Zs, what is it that the Gen Zs are looking for? They're looking for trust, which is a stable stakes. There is no compromise on trust at all, right? And any platform, any news source that is not trustworthy, which has not been fact-checked, is something that kind of is a no-go for the Gen Zs once they determine that it is in that manner. But what is more important, or even more important, is the fact that community becomes very key for them. They like to have participation in the process of news, whether it's in terms of getting into community meetups, understanding community activities, understanding what, sorry, please.
When you say community, is it in person or is it online?
Both. So what we have seen is it can be online communities, or it could be even in-person neighborhood communities that they are interested to be a part of. Right. And the third, which is possibly the most important, is positivity as against pessimism. Today, what we have heard the Gen Z speak about is the fact that there is a lot of pessimism in the news. It's all negative, it's gloom and doom all around. What they're looking for is positivity. What they're looking for is, therefore what? We know these are the problems, but what could be possible solutions? Are we discussing solutions at all, or are we not? And that is what they're essentially looking for. They're looking at news to become lighter. They're also looking at it to be more entertaining, right? But with the core of trust and fact not being compromised under any circumstances. If you move to the next slide, please. Now, given this, all of you are from the news industry, so one of the key sources of you is going to be how you make revenues as well, and ads is one of the core sources of revenue. And if you are targeting Gen Zs, you need to have ads that are actually talking to Gen Zs as well. Now, if you have to have ads which talk to Gen Zs, it is important that they kind of get into the content, into the flow of the content. The ads cannot stand out and be different from the way your content structure is going to be. If you have a particular language, a particular way in which your content is being presented, and your ad is very different, it will not really work with them. So essentially, what we saw was that the ads need to be as thoughtful as the content. They have to be building in the humor element to it. They have to have something which is for them into it. It needs to tell an important story. It has to be visually appealing, and it has to share something new and innovative when they are talking about whatever they are talking about in the ad. And that is what would make an ad relevant and exciting for this audience set as such. We spoke about generative AI as well, and if I move to the next slide, we also spoke to them about generative AI and what the Gen Zs think of generative AI. And generative AI, it emerges, is an important aspect of how they consume news and what news means for them. They're already into generative AI, so if, as publishers, as creators, we are not doing enough of generative AI, we are possibly being left behind. If you look at the way they are using generative AI, they are using it to get news quickly. They are getting whatever is understanding better the complex topics that are being spoken about, if they are not explained well enough, in short, bite-sized news items, and also in many cases to translate news, because as we said, there's a lot of news that is getting created in Indian languages. If you do not understand an Indian language, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't get to consume that news any longer, and that is what generative AI is being used for at this point in time. So what we saw was that we also asked our audiences, what are they most comfortable with when it comes to generative AI in the context of news, amongst those who are using it. And if you'd see, on a top 2 box, on a 5-point rating, so if you ask a question, how comfortable you are, and you have a 5-point rating scale, very comfortable to not at all comfortable. Those who have said 4 and 5, which is very comfortable and somewhat comfortable, short news summaries, social media, video or visuals, audio format, and in-depth articles are the top 5 that comes out in terms of what they are most comfortable with in using generative AI in the context of news. So that's essentially what we saw from a generative AI and from a news ecosystem in particular for Gen Z. So effectively, they are potent target audiences for all of you, but they have to be treated differently. They have to be spoken to differently. The language, the demeanor has to be very different. It is not about the language that you use in terms of whether it's Hindi or English or Kannada that you use. That doesn't really matter as much because you have generative AI for them to translate it. What is important is how you actually bring that up to them. If I move to the next slide. So that's the essence of the study that we did. It was a very large study, and this gives you a quick preview of what were the target audiences. You see that we covered about 4,200 people, Gen Z people, across 40 markets, 8 languages were covered. But more importantly, we also had a lot of syndicated data from Kantar, which were also used as a part of the study, where we did a deep profiling of Gen Zs versus others, and a lot of qualitative interviews with Gen Zs to understand some of these behaviors in depth, right? So the report, if you move to the next slide, is available for download using this QR code. And if you move to the next slide, please. There's also, based on this, a Gen Z Connect program that Google has kind of set up. The details of the programs are here. And you'd also have a QR code at the bottom. So if you're interested to know more, you can scan the QR code and you can be a part of the program. Shweta from Google is also here in the audience. So if you have any questions specific to the program, Shweta would be happy to take it. So that's what I had from a presentation standpoint. I'm sure this session would have would have created a lot of questions in your mind, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you would have. Thank you so much. I already see some hands going up, so maybe the gentleman at the back. Do we have some mics, please? Yeah. Yes, please. Yes, please.
I just wanted to ask that this is your analysis and everything. Is the particular audience is also interested in doing some fact check of the news also?
Yes. So they do their own fact check of the news in case they are not able to determine the authenticity of the news through the news itself. So there are 2 parts to it, and that's a very interesting question. The one is the source of the news in itself, if they're able to ascertain the source of the news, and if they're able to ascertain the fact that the news comes in from a genuine source, which is trusted, reputable, they don't really do a fact check of their own. However, if they're not able to ascertain the source or are not sure of the source in itself, in those cases, they do a detailed fact check before they accept. In many cases, they do not forward those news unless they have fact checked those news themselves.
My name is Selvin. I am from Christ University. I myself, being a Gen Z, I do watch these hard news and all, but I have seen people like this hard news is not something that can be completely avoided and everything being positive. So how do you capture this Gen Z generation to also listen to these kind of news? Because this is also important to be aware, right? So
yeah. So yeah, it's a good question. And I think the Gen Z is not saying that they will not consume news. They are not saying that they do not need the news. What they're saying is that the traditional way of serving news is not acceptable. So they are not questioning the journalism. They're not questioning the fact that you need to get the right set of news from the source, from the ground. All of that is very much valuable for them. What is being spoken about or what they are reacting to is the way in which it is presented to them. And they are saying that there are possibly better ways in which it can be presented to them, and that those better ways in which that can be presented could be in the form of shorter videos, could be in the form of analysis, could be in the form of ones where you can actually consume the news, get to the core of the news much faster, ensure that it is authentic, and there is a positive message out of that whole news. I will take a question here from... Yes, ma'am, please.
I'm Geeta Aravudan, journalist. So there are 2 questions over here. How interested are Gen Z in politics, like the regular politics of everyday.
Sure.
Which, in my generation we were also
Yes.
obsessed with that, but now I find it's a very different approach. Are they at all interested is one question.
Sure.
Another, with the availability of AI and so many other tools, I know my grandchildren are much more adept at using it than I am.
Yes.
So they can generate their own ideas and concept of the news. Does it change things in any way? Are they, they are immature in a way,
Yes.
if they are only 18 or 20, but they're also in many ways much more mature because they have consumed so much more than we have.
Yes. Let me answer the first one first. The second one, I guess, would be more of a point of view than an answer from the research as such, based on whatever we have seen across all the Gen Z studies that we have done. On politics, yes, they're very much interested in politics. As a matter of fact, we have seen politics amongst the first 2-3 kind of genres of news that they would like to consume. The challenge with politics, though, in their minds is that it's all about negativity. It is all about being biased, right? So if you look at that slide where we spoke about the negatives of traditional media, most of them are actually linked to politics and the fact that it's there is a political undertone in all of that. So the point that they are making is that politics has to be more community-led. It has to connect to the community. It has to bring in a community feeling, whether it's an online or an offline community, but it has to connect the community. It has to then move from being very negative or being very biased to being a more balanced and being a source where you are actually looking at solutions as well. Today, there is no solutioning that is being discussed. Means, of course, as I think Vasu said in the previous session, solution does not come from the journalist, but the solution comes in from me. If there's a panel discussion or if there are experts who are coming in, they bring in the solutions. But that solution discussion is not happening enough for the liking of the Gen Z. And that is what is keeping them, making them disheartened, but politics is an important aspect for them to look at. So that's the first one. On the second, user-generated content from a news perspective is something that's been there for a while now, ma'am, and we all know that. And it's becoming easier today. So you therefore see a lot of creators who are Gen Z creators at this point in time coming up. So yes, it is a lot easier for them to create. But having said that, what is becoming very important at this point in time with respect to Gen Z is the fact that authenticity is something that they are questioning for every news article or a video or a reel that they see. And if they are questioning that, those creators, the Gen Z creators, they themselves would need to ensure that the content is authentic, whatever they build around it. So long as they are doing it, and whether they're using generative AI or otherwise, it is fine. And there are a lot of experiments that we are seeing Gen Z is doing, Gen Z creators are doing, around using generative AI to get user-generated content and creating news content as well. So that's something that will evolve as we see it. But yeah, means not every Gen Z will become a creator. Like not everyone can become any kind of a creative person. So you'd need a bent of mind to do that and stay at it for a longer period of time. Tools are, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Correct. So tools have been there, different kinds, at different points in time, there have been different tools available. Is also what, as a person, you get inclined towards. And not everybody will get inclined, and some of them will do better, and the others would get phased out as such. Panelists.
Chitra Subramaniam, I'm a co-founder of the News Minute. You mentioned trust in one of your presentations.
Yes.
So the question I have is that I don't believe it's easy to be Gen Z. Everybody's portraying them as being restless and mindless and this and that. How do they address the question of trust? Where do they go?
It's a very, very good question, ma'am. There are three things that they do with trust. One, there are brands, news brands, and I'm talking from a news context at this point in time. There are news brands which they trust, right? So it could be a large news network, which they would believe is one that would not give out incorrect information, or news sources that they have been consuming news from in the past. So those would be the ones that they would trust. So that's the first source. The second source is forwarded content, whether it is forwarded through WhatsApp or on Insta Reels or any other sources, or even YouTube. If in case there are forwarded content from those, they would first ask the person who has forwarded whether you have fact-checked it, especially if it's not from one of those sources, right? And if it has not been fact-checked, even before they fact-check, they would actually pull up that person to say that you shouldn't have forwarded it before you have fact-checked it. So that's a common thread that we have seen amongst all Gen Zs, and they have spoken about it. And whenever it's not been fact-checked, they do fact-check it, go through different sources, determine whether it's actually true or not, and only then they put it up. In certain cases, they actually go back and tell the person who had forwarded the content to delete it because it's incorrect, right? So that's something that we have seen happen amongst them. So that's how they do it, ma'am. We'll take a question from here. I saw a hand up on this side. Is there anyone here?
It's a related question.
Okay, sure, ma'am.
In your survey, is there a list of sources that they have mentioned, that Gen Z has mentioned, that they think that they go to and that they can trust?
Well, we haven't really asked specifically for sources that they go to. But yes, when they have spoken about it, especially in the qualitative work that we have done, there have been mentions of a lot of sources which they go to. And that's available in the report. We have put it up in the report as well, yes. Please go ahead, sir.
So my point is, this is to referring to her question. Daily hunt, for example, right? It's people open it every day. My wife opens it, and when I checked with the guy who runs Daily Hunt, he says that whole thing is algorithmically curated. Right? And just to give you a point, this is something I drove with him. There was a news item about 10 days ago when there were floods happening in the north, Uttarakhand and so on. And there was one news item which talked about a village where there was a rescue operation conducted by the army. And apparently, each time the helicopters rescued these people, they would jump back into the river. This was the news item.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The village had about 500 people, out of which 400 were supposed to have been rescued, and they jumped back. Now, so I picked it up, and my wife reading on me on Sunday morning, and I said, this is ridiculous, this can't be true. So I go to Umang Bedi, who runs News Hunt, on LinkedIn, I know him. Yeah. And I said, what happened to your algorithm? He said, misfired. So when you talk about Gen Z and the pandering that is done to them, which is very, very tech-enabled, the first thing you have to do is educate them to figure out news, right? So who can you trust? Was Chitra's question, right? How do you know are you enabled to figure out what to trust?
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to take this question, it's the Gen Z themselves, actually on this case.
When I was growing up, I didn't know who to trust for a while. Right?
Correct.
I was print media. I would read the Indian Express in the morning and then in the afternoon and so on. Right?
Yeah.
We made an effort, so we were not being served.
Correct. So there's a huge amount of content that is available today to them.
Makes you lazy.
Right.
Lazy. That's what my question was.
Yeah. So I think we need to have that's a debate topic. Yeah, that's a debate topic. You're right.
Leading news of democracy requires maturity. Right?
True. I think, but at the same time, just a counter view on that. I'm not a Gen Z myself, as you can see, right? but I think just as a counter view, they are the ones who are finally voting as well, right? They are taking a decision on which government to come on. So if as a government, as media organizations, it's also for us to figure out how best to communicate to them, to give them the right messages, and as journalists who are doing responsible journalism, it would be important for us as well to communicate. I'm getting into some very dangerous territory as a market researcher in particular.
So how things started, because the Gen Z and all that, they were being spoken to But a very senior journalist, Kumi Kapoor, wrote a piece before the elections came out. There was no question of 400 par. They're not even going to get the majority. So, you have to put your news on the ground.
Yes.
And then you talked about trust. So I don't want to get into this.
Yeah.
But there is something about sit down and read a book, Sorry.
Yeah, no, agreed. Means I think, and I'll take the question at the back, because I'll take the question at the back. Been raising hands for a while. Do you have a mic, ma'am, at the back?
Thank you. I'm Lakshya, and I'm Gen Z, quote unquote, myself. And most of my cohort is the kind of cohort your survey targeted, English speaking, urban, upper class, etc. Even when you say that, Gen Z cares about politics, political news, there's also a layer of what type of political news they care about. For example, most of my cohort really did care about the stray dog issue, but not about vote chori. So does something in your analysis or survey come out as to why there's this even layering between what sort of news they care about?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly what we said, that community is a bigger issue for them. Community, politics is all about community and how you connect with the community. And the example that you gave of stray dogs is a very clear example of community and how you'd actually care for the community, what you can do with the community, build solidarity, go out and do things for the community as such. So it is all about, so it's not about, in many cases, generic issues at times which do not have a solution to it. So wherever there is a problem and a solution, it works a lot better with Gen Z. If there is a problem, no solution, it does not really work as well. So I, again, don't want to get into a vote chori and all of that. It gets into a political area. But suffice it to say that you would need to have a problem-solution approach to target and appeal to the Gen Z. And wherever you do that, you would be able to make a lot more of an impact than if you are just providing a problem without a solution. So there's a lot of difference that we see, large cities versus small cities, male versus females. But means the largest story that we presented here is across. So this story does not change. What changes are the nuances within it. So certain areas, certain aspects might actually go up. So for example, I'm missing the slide now, but in certain cases, when we spoke about generative AI and some of the aspects of generative AI, there may be, in the top 5, there may be something else that comes in. But conceptually, the way the Gen Zs look at things does not really change much.
I was wondering whether you're planning to repeat this survey with rural Gen Z and to see how their opinions or their use differs.
Not to the best of my knowledge at this point in time, no. But if we are, we will definitely come back and share those findings with the community, as such as Google and Kantar have always been doing.
Hi, I'm Shashank. I work in communications for the Congress Party. There was a very good question there. My question is, do you have a breakdown of the platforms, or is it just based on Google? Because one struggle we typically have is Google gives out APIs, Meta gives out APIs, we're able to track ad spend, etc. But the issue we deal with is WhatsApp forwards. It's like a closed system. So do you have a breakdown? I scanned your report also, it doesn't give a breakdown.
Yeah.
That is question number one. And particularly on your research, can you list down, or is there a place where you have listed the questions you asked? What your 90-page, I scanned, I didn't go into details. It talks about the outcomes, but what questions you asked, can we get a view of that? Those are the two questions there.
So yeah, means we wouldn't have an understanding of the forwards of WhatsApp. What are the sources of those? That's something that we wouldn't have as such, because they are looked at as WhatsApp by Gen Zs as well. So that we do not have. In terms of questions, in most of the cases, we would have the questions mentioned below any of the tables or the charts. But we can connect offline as well, and we can talk further. Of course, it's a sponsored study with Google, so whatever we share, it has to be with consent, but we can talk about that. Some of the questions we can look at.
Couple of queries. First, it's about like the AI assistants that get used will make mistakes. Even like fact checking times, there can be mistakes. If you ask a direct question which has a very specific answer, there are mistakes that can happen in the result. Not necessary that Gen Z will go and query it in multiple places, right? So they will have to have that like the bias gets carried forward, right? Basically, like whoever sees that particular response, and it's not anything about politics or anything. It can be very specific, industry-specific questions about anything, right? Yeah. So there, is it that the regulation at the higher government or at an international level for tech standardization in responses and verification of the responses has to be laid before, like, it can be that any response towards a specific question which should have a scientific true answer is put in place. That has there got to be regulation around that? That is first. And second one is that in Gen Z terms, we know that reading habit is going down for sure, right? Now, if like there are complex topics, like I engage with personal finance. Now, there is a breakdown where if you give a detail of the land, especially in like personal finance, which may be required for you there to understand in complexity for almost everybody to meet solutions. So, like, because they are not reading it and you try to explain it, is there a, like, if an AI chatbot is giving the summary, will they still drop off if the complexity increases in some depth, even if it is explained in a succinct enough manner?
Sure. Let me answer both the questions. The first one, my answer is I'm a market researcher, not a tech guy, nor am I a government functionary. So I'm obviously not the right person to even try and answer that question. So I'll skip that question. On the second one, when it comes to how would they react to complex terms, if what we have realized is if the content is interesting enough, created in a way which is interesting enough, and if they have questions and they are not able to understand certain terms, certain aspects of how things happen, because you cannot really do everything in one video or one article or whatever, right? They do take the effort of going in and searching and knowing more, and that's how they use generative AI, right? If you would have seen, one of the key uses of generative AI is to break down complex areas of information that they do not have information on in the main source as such. So yes, they do it, but it is important that we actually communicate that well enough and build whatever we are delivering to them, build it in a manner that entices them to go and make that effort. If the content is not enticing enough, they will not make that effort. But if it is enticing enough, they will make that effort.
Mr. Biswa, yes. What is the incentive for a tech company to prioritize authenticity of news over virality of news?
Well, I don't think I have an answer to that, honestly. At least my research does not answer that directly. Having said that, virality, the way from a Gen Z perspective, whatever I have understood a Gen Z from the various researches I have done, and I have a Gen Z myself, is the fact I have a Gen Z kid myself. I am not a Gen Z, sorry, if it sounded like that. Is the fact that virality will get you once the kind of viral video or content that you would be able to get. But authenticity will help you be there in the longer run. And Gen Zs, finally, once they trust you, they will come back to you. If it's a viral video or a viral source, but it is finally proven to be incorrect. If it is correct, authentic, then of course, by all means, it will do very well and it will continue to help you grow. But the question is a trade-off. If you are trading off virality for authenticity, my understanding is a viral video or a, let's talk about a video in this case, is not authentic. That's the implication that you are having. And if that is the case, the moment they start doing a fact check, even if it is viral, it will pull down and impact the brand in a big way. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you regarding the attention span of Gen Z, the generation. So, like, I am a huge fan of, I'm a sports journalist, and my name is Vishnu. I am a huge fan of like reading long form articles and all that. Do you agree that Gen Z has a lesser attention span and they may not like be able to like read long form articles? Because I think one of the main problems is that or the aspects is that they are more reliant on social media like Instagram, like reels and stuff. So how much of an impact does it have on Gen Z's attention span? Yeah, thank you.
Well, so the answer is yes and no. They will have very short attention span to identify what they want to spend time on. And that's where a shorts or a reels come in. Once they identify what they would like to spend time on, they are happy to spend time on long form content as well. Right? So it's not that they do not consume long-form content. Means there are, again, I don't want to name people here, but there are content providers and news content providers who create content which are, and some of, I think, content of newslaundry and news minutes are also 2-3 hours, as we heard today. And they are being consumed, I'm sure, by Gen Zs as well. We know a lot of content being consumed by Gen Zs, which are long-form content. But it is important to grab their attention, and grabbing their attention has to be in the first few minutes. So how well you make those first few minutes count is the most important.
So I wanted to ask that, do you have some data reference or some data point in respect of the data, I would say, content consumption between ruling party versus the opposition?
No, we don't. Like we don't. This has been, there's nothing where we looked at any political parties as a part of this study. We have a hand up there. Can we have the mic at the back, please?
Hi, hello. I'm Abdev. I'm a journalism student from St. Joseph's University. So my question is, do you think that Gen Zs also prefer alternate sources of journalism, such as citizen journalism, for topics such as the stray dogs one, and for like political issues like subaltern journalism sources such as Khabar Lahariya? So that's my question. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I think anything which connects to the society in general, as we said in our presentation as well, is something that they appreciate, and they would, if given a chance, they would love to be a part of that. So yes, the answer is yes. But again, as I said, not everybody would want to do that. There would be a select few who would actually do it, and the others would be consumers. You need to have consumers as well, right? If everybody becomes a creator, then you have no consumer, then you have a challenge. But I think that's all the time I had today. That's what I've been told. My time's up. I'm happy to take questions offline if there are still questions that are there. But it's been an amazing session. Thank you so much for the time, and thank you for so many questions. I hope I have been able to answer you well. Download the report and connect onto this QR code to know more about the program as well. Thank you once again. Thank you.